against both Labour and the Lib Dems. And of course, Liz Truss is the candidate that can unite the party, unite the country against Putin, and win that next election for us. I came to this country at the age of 11, fleeing Saddam Hussein. Britain has given me everything, and I don't take the task of choosing its next Prime Minister lightly, nor should you. But never have I been more certain that I'm making the right choice. Liz is decent, honest, hard-working, and above all, understands the economics of growth. She does what she says she will do. That is why she has my vote. Thank you.
The United Kingdom is a great country, and I know that a united Conservative Party can unleash the potential of all the people who make our country so great. To win the next election, we need to deliver, and deliver for the British people. I know that our country's best days lie ahead. I'm the candidate with a clear vision for the future, who can drive change and get things done. As Trade Secretary, I negotiated deals with allies like Australia and Japan, creating opportunities around the world for British business. And as Prime Minister, I will continue to deliver on the opportunities of Brexit. I will lead a government committed to core Conservative principles: low taxes, a firm grip on spending, driving growth in the economy, and giving people the opportunity to achieve anything they want to achieve, regardless of their background. I will work day and night to lead a party and a government that puts more money in your pocket and secures a better life for you and your family. I've consistently delivered when I have said I would. And I love our country. I want the best for us all, and I'm the person to deliver that.
Please welcome Liz Truss.
It's fantastic to be here in Birmingham. I'm not from a traditional Conservative background. I grew up in Paisley in Scotland and in Leeds, where I went to the local comprehensive school. And what I saw at my school is I saw children who were let down. They were let down because of low expectations, because of their background. They were let down because of Leeds City Council caring more about political correctness than making sure all children learnt English and maths. And they were let down because of a lack of opportunity in the area. And I thought that was an appalling waste of talent. And I wanted things to be different. That's why I went into politics. I want everybody across our great country to have opportunity, regardless of their background. I want us to be an aspiration nation. And that is what our fantastic Mayor, Andy Street, is delivering here in the West Midlands. He's delivered on the fantastic Commonwealth Games, and it was great to visit a few weeks ago. He's delivered on the trams and the metro. And he has delivered investment, growth and business into this fantastic part of the country. And what I want to do as Prime Minister is I want to help him and all of our brilliant MPs across the Midlands deliver more for people and open up those opportunities and that aspiration. But the reality is we face difficult economic times. We have the war in Ukraine, we have the energy crisis, and we have the aftermath of COVID. And we've had several decades in this country of low economic growth. So we do need to be bold, and we do need to do things differently. We can't just have more business as usual. We need a plan for growth. And that is what I would deliver as your Prime Minister. First of all, I will unleash the opportunities of Brexit. We need to get... And that means that we will unleash investment into cities like Birmingham towns and cities across our country. We could do more trade deals, benefiting industries like ceramics, industries like the car industry, and I had a great visit earlier to JLR, industries like financial services and technology. But we also need to cut tax. I would reverse the national insurance increase. The fact is we didn't need to increase national insurance. We can still afford to pay off the debt, start paying off the debt after 3 years. I'd also have a moratorium, a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy to immediately save people money off their fuel bills. And I'd keep corporation tax low, because if we raise our corporation tax to the same level as France and 10 points higher than Ireland, we won't attract that new investment into this part and other parts of our country. And I fundamentally believe, as Conservatives, we need to be on the side of people who work hard and do the right thing. The self-employed, the small businesses, commuters who go into work every day, that's whose side we are on. And I would legislate to make sure essential services are being provided, like our railway services, and we stop the militant trade unions disrupting our country. Now, before I was a Member of Parliament, I joined the Conservative Party back in 1996. I was a party activist, and I was also a local councillor. And as a local councillor, I sat on the planning committee. And I'm afraid to say those are hours of my life I will never get back, because we were overruled by the planning inspectorate in Bristol or the top-down housing targets. So I would immediately abolish the top-down targets in the planning bill coming up, in the Levelling Up bill. And I would level up in a conservative way by creating new low-tax investment zones with the support of local MPs, local mayors, bringing investment into our country. And what I would also do is change the Treasury rules about investment. So we're putting more investment into the areas that don't have it already, not the areas that do have it already. And I would also back our fantastic farmers. I want our farmers producing food, not filling out forms, and I want our fields full of crops and livestock, not full of solar panels. We need to continue to stand up to Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. I'm proud that we were the first European country to send weapons to Ukraine. And I, as Foreign Secretary, put the toughest sanctions regime on Russia of any country in the world. But we cannot be complacent about our security. We need to make sure that we are increasing our defence at this insecure time. And I would raise defence spending to 3% of GDP by the end of the decade. And I will also crack down on illegal immigration. I supported and worked with Priti Patel on the Rwanda scheme. We need to make it work, and we need to expand it to more countries. And what I would do is legislate to make sure our decisions about our borders cannot be overruled by the ECHR. But as well as freedom and democracy around the world, we also need it here in Britain. We need free speech, and we need to push back against the identity politics of the left. Now, I'm a plain-speaking Yorkshire woman, and I know that a woman is a woman. And I will make sure that we protect our single-sex spaces like domestic violence shelters. I'll also stand up for the United Kingdom. I travel around the world. People respect us. They respect the role we have played in democracy and freedom. But there are too many people in Britain trying to talk our country down, saying we should somehow be ashamed of our past, that our best days are behind us. I don't agree with those people. Our best days are ahead of us. And we can see what's happening here and how Andy Street is turbocharging and moving forward Birmingham. And in 2019, we won swathes of seats right across the Midlands. Places like Stoke-on-Trent, West Bromwich, Dudley North. People voted for us not because they wanted the Labour Party. They were fed up with the Labour Party. They were fed up with the Labour Party letting their area down. What they wanted is conservative values. Personal responsibility, low taxation, enterprise and opportunity in their area. And that's what we have to deliver. We have to get those spades in the ground. We have to deliver on what we promised in 2019. And I'm somebody that gets things done. I don't take no from an answer. And at the Department of Trade, I delivered dozens of trade deals where people said it wouldn't be possible. At the Foreign Office, I delivered the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill to Parliament through Whitehall. We got the consent of the House of Commons. I'm prepared to get things done and take the tough decisions. And that's what we need. And that's what I will do. I will unleash the potential of our great country if I am elected as your Prime Minister. I will stand up against Keir Starmer, yet another Labour leader, yet another Labour Party politician who doesn't believe in opportunity and doesn't believe in aspiration. And I will help us, and I will make sure, working with you, that we win the next general election and we keep the West Midlands blue. Thank you. Thank you.
Liz, thank you for that opening contribution. And Liz Truss certainly seems to be full of beans as far as I can see. And actually, when you look at the opinion polls just now, I can understand Liz Truss perhaps being full of beans. And we're going to find out between us in the course of this coming session whether Liz Truss and whether Rishi Sunak are equally full of answers to questions. And what the Foreign Secretary was saying there clearly went down very well with a large section of this hall. But I think you all know, because people listening to this live also know, there's a great deal we haven't heard from these contenders to be our Prime Minister about issues that affect millions of us at this extraordinarily difficult time. And hopefully in the course of the next couple of hours, we will make some progress on that as well. So let us now, without me taking up too much time at this stage, because I will be back and so will our candidates, let me carry on and hand over to the campaigns.
Please welcome Member of Parliament for Sutton Coldfield, Andrew Mitchell.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to these hustings in Britain's second city, which has just dazzled the world with the most brilliant, the most successful Commonwealth Games ever held. And where we, in the royal town of Sutton Coldfield, were so proud to hold the triathlon. And as we come towards the end of these major regional hustings, please let me say that both candidates, our party and our country as Prime Minister, are brilliant. And don't you think, as we look back to the start of this contest, if you can remember that far back, and at the 8 of my colleagues who first stood for the leadership, that it is only the Conservative Party, our party, which truly looks like and reflects the country which we seek to serve. And who can doubt that either of them would be a far better Prime Minister than Keir Starmer, who until recently was supporting Jeremy Corbyn to lead our country. Now, in the 35 years since I was first elected to serve in the House of Commons, no leader of our country has faced such a daunting inheritance, nor required such courage, judgment, and experience. It is as if all the threats and challenges of the last 50 years are being visited on us in one fell swoop. We face industrial disruption and an energy price hike with terrifying household costs, interest rate and mortgage and rent rises, warfare and crisis in Europe, and inflation, with the devastation it causes as it devalues us all. It was Mrs. Thatcher who said, "Inflation is the parent of unemployment and the unseen robber of those who have saved." And that is all before the huge issues for our health service which arise from the COVID crisis and its legacy. But, ladies and gentlemen, it is not problems which defeat governments. It is the way we politicians and our leaders defeat those problems which determines our fate. And so it is in these circumstances that I choose to support Rishi Sunak, as do some of our most respected former party leaders, Michael Howard and William Hague, and, you may feel this is of particular significance, some of our most successful finance ministers, chancellors Nigel Lawson, Ken Clarke, Norman Lamont, and Peter Lilly. When faced with the unprecedented challenge of COVID and the massive threat to jobs and employment, it was Rishi Sunak who designed and implemented what the IMF described as the best furlough scheme in the world, and ensured through his efforts that we protected the livelihoods of 14 million people and the future of 1.5 million businesses. And so, as we head into an extraordinary and dangerous storm of frightening economic ferocity, it is Rishi Sunak who has shown by his deeds and his actions that he is the safe helmsman with the experience, record and judgment to weather these storms, to reach out across our divided society and to secure the results we need if we are to win the next general election. We need a Prime Minister of courage, judgment, decency and experience. That Prime Minister is Rishi Sunak. Thank you very much.
They say beware the underdog, because an underdog has got nothing to lose. An underdog fights for every inch. They work harder, stay longer, think smarter. Underdogs don't give up. They'll do the difficult things, and they never ever get complacent. So, write them off if you like. Sit back and dismiss them, but if there's one thing I know to be true, it's that Britain loves an underdog.
Please welcome Rishi Sunak.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you. Now, I am here tonight for one simple reason, and that's because our country did something extraordinary for my family. Like many of yours here, it welcomed them here as immigrants and allowed them to build a better life. Now, I was raised with a few simple values. First among those is that family means everything to me. And that's because we know, don't we, as Conservatives, that the bonds of family are far greater than anything any government could ever hope to replicate. And in my family, we prioritised hard work as the way to forge ahead in life. My dad was an NHS GP. My mum ran the local chemist in Southampton, where I grew up, and I spent all my time working in her shop, out and about, delivering medicines to patients, but also doing her books and seeing the power of that small business to provide jobs in our local community. Now, for my parents, there was one thing that they believed above all would be the way to build a better future for their 3 children. And it was simple. It was through education. And that's why today I passionately believe that the best way that we reduce inequality, the best way that we spread opportunity, indeed the best way that we transform people's lives, is by ensuring that the birthright of every child is a world-class education. And that, in a nutshell, are my values. Patriotism, family, hard work, service. And I know, as I saw you nodding, that those are your values too. And that's because they're Conservative values. And that's why I want to be your Prime Minister, to put those values into action to build a better Britain. But how are we going to do that? Well, we need to do 3 things. First, we must restore trust. Next, we need to rebuild the economy. And then we need to reunite our country. Now, when it comes to restoring trust, for me, that starts with honesty. And as you can see in this leadership race, I have not chosen to say the things that people may want to hear. I have said the things that I believe the country needs to hear. And even though that doesn't make my life easy, it is honest, and for me, that is what leadership is all about. But we'll also restore trust by delivering on the things that matter to people. That's why I've set out a plan to start reforming the NHS, so that we can stop constantly thinking about throwing more money at it and more talk about the efficient healthcare that we're getting out of it. It's why I want to take on this lefty woke culture that seems to want to cancel our history, our values, and our women. And it's why I want to make sure that we keep our communities and streets safe. So it is remarkable that right here we have a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner who seems to be spending more of his time trying to find ways to make it easier for people to take illegal drugs rather than actually tackling crime. I tell you this, for me, whether it comes to using things like stop or search or indeed tackling grooming gangs, I will never let political correctness stand in the way of keeping us safe. And whether it is that Labour Police and Crime Commissioner or indeed the shambles that is Sandwell Council, it just shows why we need Conservative councillors, Conservative PCCs and great Conservative mayors like Andy Street in charge. But it's also why I want to restore trust in our rural communities, like mine in North Yorkshire, like yours here, in Warwickshire and Staffordshire, Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire. And that means increasing our food security, protecting our agricultural land, and unequivocally backing British farmers. And it's why I have set out a detailed and radical plan to finally get to grips with illegal migration. Now, I stand here as a product of our country's proud, compassionate history in welcoming people to our shores. See the scenes of people breaking the rules to come here? It undermines trust in the system, and it is wrong, and we must stop it. With my plan, we will, and we will get control of our borders. Now, when it comes to rebuilding the economy, you all know that the #1 challenge is inflation. Inflation is the enemy. It makes everyone poorer. It eats into people's hard-earned savings, their pensions. It pushes up mortgage rates. Now, this autumn and winter, I will make sure that we support people with the cost of living. Not only cutting VAT on energy bills, but going further to help the most vulnerable in our society, like those on the lowest incomes and pensioners, because that is what a compassionate Conservative government must do at a time like this. But what, ladies and gentlemen, what I will not do is pursue policies that risk making inflation worse and lasting far longer, especially if those policies amount to borrowing £50 billion and putting it on the country's credit card and then asking our kids and our grandkids to pick up the tab, because that is not right. Now, I will cut your taxes, but I will do it responsibly by being tough on public spending and by growing our economy. And that's why this autumn I'm going to radically change how we tax businesses in this country, cutting taxes for those businesses that are doing the right thing, investing in expanding their production, businesses that are innovating to create the products and services of the future, because that is how you drive growth in a modern economy, and the businesses that will benefit the most will be those manufacturing businesses right here in the Midlands. Now, but it's also, as someone who was proud to support Brexit, we need to make sure that we capitalise on it, and that means we must get on with cutting EU red tape. And as Chancellor, I created a new Brexit policy of free ports and put one right here in the Midlands. It's why, as Chancellor, I invested in new institutes of technology here, transport infrastructure, in communities up and down, in Stoke, in Wolverhampton, in Dudley, in Mansfield and Ashfield. I was a Chancellor who delivered for the Midlands, and I will be a Prime Minister who continues levelling up here in the Midlands. Because in 2 years, when it comes to reuniting our country, we have to do something that has never been done before. We have to make British political history by winning a 5th general election in a row. Now, even though that hasn't been done, I know that working together, all of us, we can do it. But it's going to require us to appeal to swing voters everywhere. Right here, in the north, in the south, in Liberal areas and Labour areas, in Remain areas, in Brexit areas, in urban areas, in rural areas, in Wales and in Scotland. And I passionately believe, and the evidence suggests, that I am the candidate that offers our party the best opportunity of beating Labour and ensuring Keir Starmer never walks through the doors of number 10 Downing Street. And in conclusion, let me just say this. You saw me as Chancellor at the beginning of the pandemic acting radically to successfully safeguard our economy through the 300 years. Now, as your Prime Minister, I promise you, I will apply that same urgency and grip to every other aspect of government to build a better Britain. A Britain where our kids can walk safely on the streets at night. A Britain where the NHS is finally reformed and there for us when we need. A Britain where our schools and apprenticeships are the envy of the world in providing opportunity. And a Britain where our economy is the most dynamic it has ever been, with our businesses investing and innovating to create jobs in every part of our country. But I also promise you this, perhaps more importantly, that I will give you my all to ensure that each and every one of you here tonight can always feel enormously proud of the Conservative government that I will be privileged to lead. Party leader, but also the next Prime Minister of our great country. Thank you.
Well, that was punchy, I would have thought. I mean, even as a perfect neutral, I think I have to pay tribute to the energy and the force and the word perfect nature of that presentation. The campaign videos, it was like watching a Hollywood opening this evening. And so, look, we'll carry on now because, as I mentioned earlier on, I think we know now a certain amount about these two contenders to be our Prime Minister. And I think no one in the hall could really deny there's an awful lot we do not know, an awful lot that we want to know. And that goes for people in this hall, in the Conservative Party, and the many, many more outside. So if I can do anything, and we can do anything between us to make something of a dent in that vacuum of information and all of the rest of it, let's have a go. I'm going to start now by welcoming, if you would, to the stage, Foreign Secretary, contender for Prime Minister, Liz Truss.
Hi, John. How are you? Lovely to see you.
Have a seat. We'll have a chat. It's good to see you, Liz. You look very, very bouncy. You look very confident. And I can, looking at these opinion polls, I can quite see where that might be the case. But there's an awful lot I'd like to ask you, a great deal more than I get to ask you in the time available to me or that we all have this evening here at this 10th of 12th Hustings in the course of this campaign. So let me start then with something which is, and you'll know this, very much on the mind of millions of people out there today. The latest forecasts for inflation are terrifying. At the end of this week, we'll get a number, the latest number, for the energy price cap. We expect something £3,500 or something north of that. There's talk of the cost of borrowing in the city, maybe going up to 7%. I could go on, but it all adds up to fear and legitimate fear and worry in the hearts of so many people. Now, you haven't quite said so, but somehow, by some curious means, between your camp and people like me, we now clearly understand that there will be a special budget statement, if you're the Prime Minister, towards the back end of September. First of all, you can confirm that, I've no doubt. And I know you're not going to give me the detail of that statement. I'm not going to even try to force details of that out for you. I know you'll tell me, and just to spare you and us some time, I know that you want to leave some leeway for your next Chancellor when you get into the job. But one thing you can tell us now, because you are bidding to become First Lord of the Treasury and the pinnacle of our office of this coming government under whoever the Prime Minister happens to be, you believe it's you. The pollsters seem to agree with you. So can you tonight, can you now reassure those who are worst off in our country, those pensioners, poor pensioners, people on benefits, people in most need, that in that coming budget statement, which you may or may not call a budget, they will be fully protected from at least the effects of the coming rises in energy bills, which are going to be far greater than anyone imagined?
Well, look, we are facing very, very difficult economic times, and this is a crisis that's been brought on by COVID, by the war in Ukraine, and that is why it's so vital we stand up to Vladimir Putin. But we've got another issue that I would add to your list, John, which is the issue of low economic growth and the danger of a recession. And we know that a recession would carry a huge toll. And we also need to make sure the economy is growing. So we have multiple challenges that we face as a country. And this is why we have to be bold. And I have set out a bold agenda of not just lowering taxes and helping people who are struggling. And I understand there are problems with food bills, with fuel bills, but also with the cost of living. We also need to make sure we grow the economy and we avoid talking ourselves into a recession. I think that's very important. Taxes are currently at a 70-year high, and there is a current proposal to raise corporation tax, which I believe would deter investment and make it harder for us to grow the economy. So we have multiple challenges. There will need to be a fiscal event, as you rightly say, and I've set out my priorities. My first priority is reducing taxes, because what I don't believe is taking money from people in taxes and then giving it back to them in benefits. That is Gordon Brown economics, and frankly, it hasn't worked. And the second thing we need to deal with is supply, and in particular, the energy supply. We haven't done enough to get gas out of the ground, to use our reserves, to move forward with nuclear, to move forward with renewables. And we need to get on with those things much quicker, as well as liberating other bits of supply in the economy. I talked in my speech about investment. You know, we need to do things like Solvency II, so we liberate investment. So we need to deal with the supply. Now, of course, in any fiscal event, a chancellor has to look at people on fixed incomes. And I've already committed to the triple lock for pensioners. I've already committed to a temporary moratorium on the green energy levy, which would take money off everybody's fuel bills. But as you rightly say, we are not going to sit here today, John, and write the budget. But what I fear has been missing from the economic discourse is, first of all, dealing with growth and getting growth going, because without growth, we are in an even worse position.
Let me pick up on that question of growth. I'm going to try and keep my questions short. I'd urge you to be as brief as you reasonably can. We've got a lot to get through in little time. It is your signature policy, Liz, to carry out these unfunded tax cuts in the hope of stimulating growth. Your critics say that's a route to higher inflation, which would hurt everyone, including the worst off. Michael Gove says you're on a holiday from reality. Can you give your critics an example, a clear example of where a country has successfully grown its economy through cutting taxes? Because without that, aren't you inviting the country to join you on an experiment with people's livelihoods and lives?
Well, I give you the example of Britain, where we cut corporation tax and we saw revenues increase. There's an example of where cutting taxes actually helped us attract more revenue into the Treasury and more growth into the economy. And this whole language, John, of unfunded tax cuts implies the static model, the so-called abacus economics that the Treasury orthodoxy has promoted for years. But it hasn't worked for our economy, because what we've ended up with is high tax, high spending and low growth. And that is not a sustainable model for Britain's future.
What I want to... You defended that orthodoxy, that Treasury government orthodoxy, for year after year after year.
I sat in Cabinet and I opposed the national insurance rise for precisely the reason. And I raise my issues internally. I've complained about plenty of these policies internally, but I respect collective responsibility and I was loyal throughout. But fundamentally, it was wrong to raise national insurance. We promised we wouldn't do it in our manifesto. We didn't need to do it. We could have funded the NHS costs out of general taxation, and that decision was taken. I think it's wrong, because we now have the highest taxes in 70 years. We're talking about putting our corporation tax up to the same level as France. Last time I LALR in the Midlands to attract the investment in, to create those high-paid jobs. And I could give you plenty of examples of economies have grown.
Let me ask you this, Liz. I mean, you have invited, haven't you, comparisons with Margaret Thatcher in many ways.
No, I haven't invited them. The media constantly go on about it. And look,
but I believe you welcome the comparison.
Because frankly, every woman in politics gets compared to Theresa May or Margaret Thatcher, because there haven't been as many women leaders as men leaders.
Yeah,
that's the truth.
But I don't hear you disowning the comparison with a small state conservative like Margaret Thatcher. Now, let me ask you this.
She was a great leader of our country, and I'm proud of the way she turned our country down. And, but that doesn't mean what we're facing now is the situation we're facing in 1979. It's a different situation, and we need different policies now. But the principles she believed in were the right principles. Enterprise, personal responsibility, giving people control over their own money, putting money back in people's pockets. Those are the principles I agree with.
Liz, the tax burden was higher when Margaret Thatcher left office than it was when she took office. Now, you say your strategy can avert, your word avert, recession in this country. The Bank of England is predicting recession over the space of 5 quarters starting this year. Are you saying you can stop that, you can roll that back? Because that is a huge promise, and you'd be judged by it, by the electorate.
What I'm saying is that a forecast isn't destiny, that we have the ability to change our own future by doing things differently. And this is why we need to be bold. And I see huge opportunities. You know, one of the things we're talking about here in the Midlands is the gigafactory. That's an exciting opportunity. We need to attract that investment. You know, we're talking about huge things like life sciences, technology, financial services. We can unlock those opportunities. Now, I am not foolish enough to get out a crystal ball and say I can predict what the level of growth in the economy will be this year and next year. And by the way, nobody else can either. But what I know is putting up taxes to the highest level in 70 years will choke off that potential growth. That's what I know. I'm a Conservative. I believe in low taxes. I believe in companies succeeding. I believe in companies making profits, that they are able to hire new workers and bring in investment. And that is what I believe, and that's the platform I'm standing on.
All right. So our public services, you don't need me to tell you this, our public services are suffering, well, in pretty much all cases, something of a staffing crisis. I could talk about health, I could talk about schools, but you'll have seen just the latest headline dominating the news today about the awful crime in Liverpool, where an 8-year-old girl was killed by gunmen forcing their way into her home. What does that tell you? What would you say about that case? And what it tells you, Liz, as someone contending to be Prime Minister, about the need to strengthen law enforcement, providing more police officers in particular. You may tell me there's a promise for 20,000 more police officers. I would then tell you that's simply making up for the cuts in police numbers under Conservative rule. What do you say to reassure those people who want more done about crime?
Well, first of all, my thoughts go out to the family, and it's an absolutely appalling crime, and appalling murder that took place in Liverpool. Yes, we do need to see more police on our streets. It's about recruiting more officers, but it's also about making sure those officers are focused on the crimes we care about and the public care about. I would introduce league tables so the public have a better way of looking at how their local force is performing. And we need that change in the culture driven by police and crime commissioners, driven from the top. There is a serious problem in this country with gun crime. There's a serious problem with gangs. There's a serious problem with knife crime, and I'm absolutely determined we get a grip of that.
Okay, let me ask you now about integrity in government. This is spurred by a question from one of our Times Radio listeners who wants to know and suggests that there hasn't been enough said about the need to improve conduct in government given the grotesque circumstances of the fall of our present Prime Minister. Would you appoint an ethics advisor in place of the ethics advisor who's resigned after the previous ethics advisor who's resigned? And just as important, would you give that advisor the power to initiate investigations into misconduct, whether you want that investigation or not?
Well, first of all, I do think there need to be proper whistleblowing procedures. I would put in place, if I was elected as Prime Minister, a strong chief whip. I would return them to number 12 Downing Street, so they are at the heart of government and making sure that there is zero tolerance for misbehaviour.
What about the ethics advisor, Liz?
But I do think one of the problems we've got in this country and the way we approach things is, we have numerous advisors and independent bodies and rules and regulations. For me, it's about understanding the difference between right and wrong. And I'm somebody who has always acted with integrity. I have always been clear about what I will do and followed through on my promises and been honest about the situation. And that is what I would do as Prime Minister. And I don't think you can outsource ethics.
Is no, you will not have a
I'm not necessarily saying that, but what I am saying is the leadership themselves, the Prime Minister themselves, needs to take responsibility, and you cannot outsource ethics to an advisor. We need ethics running through the government, and it starts, the culture of organisations, John, starts at the top, and that's what's important to me. And of course, I would ensure the correct apparatus is in place so that people are able to, whistle-blow if there are problems. But if a leader is saying that they don't know the difference between right and wrong and they need to outsource it to an ethics advisor, I think that's a fundamental problem.
Okay. I'm going to slip one more in before I open questions to the floor. I'm keen to get to that stage. Just very briefly, just finally, again from a reader of the Times who asked this question. We're all human beings. We all have our flaws and our faults. What is the flaw, the fault in your character that you would like to address and improve?
I think some of my friends might say I'm a bit relentless.
That's not a flaw.
Well, it is sometimes.
That's about as much as I'm going to get on that. So I'm now going to, Liz, invite questions from the floor. I'm going to take to the podium and we'll take it from there. Now, I'm going to take, we've got arms up all around the room. So, gentleman in the blue shirt sitting close to us here.
Liz, this week, me and some Conservative friends started the Conservative Tenants and Landlords Forum. And given the average millennial has moved, on average, about 10 times, what would you do to reduce the number of unnecessary moves? And more broadly, what will you do for tenants and landlords?
Well, first of all, I think it is important that we support tenants and landlords and have a very clear rental market. And I also think it's important that we don't drive landlords out of the market and we do make sure that there are fair rules in place. But I also want to help more people who've been renting get onto the property ladder. So what I would want to do is enable people with good rental histories to be able to use those rental histories to get a mortgage, to help more people own their own home.
In a word, sir, are you satisfied by that answer? Satisfied customer there, Liz Truss. The young lady sitting just in front of me here.
Hello, Liz. I share one thing with you in that I also grew up in Paisley, but many years before you.
I'm not sure about that, madam. I'm not sure about that.
We have now had a majority Conservative government for 12 years. And in those 12 years, the country seems to have got even less Conservative. We've had to endure damaging wokery in academia, the civil service, and even the armed forces. What specific action would you take to put that right?
Well, I think we have achieved many things in our time in government. I'm proud of the education reforms that we delivered, which have improved schools. I'm proud of the welfare reforms that we've delivered that have got more people into work. But you are right. There is an issue with the culture in our public services not reflecting the views of the public. And this is true when it comes to talking down our country, which I'm concerned about, but it also is true when it comes to women's rights. And I've been very clear, for example, that I will make sure that single-sex spaces are protected. And we can't have a situation where there are hospital wards that claim to be single-sex that simply aren't, or we have domestic violence shelters where that's under question. But what it takes political leadership. And it takes a Prime Minister that makes that happen, but also ministers that make that happen in departments. And I think as Conservatives, sometimes we've been afraid of making Conservative arguments. And we've allowed the left to dominate the social space. And I won't allow that to happen. I am prepared to make the argument. I am prepared to be difficult. I'm not prepared to know for an answer. I'll get those things done.
Gentleman over here, Liz, 3 rows back at the end of the line. Behind, gentleman, yes, you, sir, thank you.
I think I might recognise that chap.
Yeah, I know you as well,
He's
Liz.
a former colleague.
Liz, I was the UK's first small business commissioner. There are 6 million small businesses in the UK. I spoke to about 2,000 of them over the period of 2 years. And I have to tell you, they often feel unloved, over-regulated and overtaxed. What can we do to promote long-term business growth? Because that's the backbone of the UK economy.
Well, Paul, you are of course right. So first of all, reversing the national insurance increase will help small businesses that have been hit with extra employers' national insurance. We also need to look at the regulatory burden on businesses. I would conduct a full tax review looking at things like business rates and how we make that much, much fairer for small businesses. But we also need to look at regulations and the regulatory burden. This is part of the point of getting all of those EU laws off the statute books by the end of 2023, because it often isn't an individual law, it's just a combination of forms that businesses are asked to fill in and the hoops they're asked to jump through. And it's easy for a big business with a big HR department, with a big tax department to do that work. It's very hard for small businesses. So I will absolutely make sure I'm cracking down on those regulations, but also we're not putting new regulations on small businesses.
Okay, Liz, some of our biggest businesses are formerly publicly owned utilities, and there are questions and concerns about those. Let me just ask you briefly, very briefly, about one, the water industry. We're seeing daily reports now of pollution fouling our waterways and coastline of this country. And meanwhile, I think average bonuses to the bosses, to executives and the water companies are at £670,000. That can't be right, can it?
I do think there are problems with the way utilities are regulated. We were one of the first countries to regulate utilities and to privatise utilities, but the world has moved on since then. And what tends to happen over time is some of those regulators get mission creep. They don't necessarily keep the market as, properly as they should. And I certainly think it's the case that water companies need to be better at stopping leaks. They need to be better at dealing with pollution, and we need to sort that out. So I do agree more action needs to be taken by the regulator.
You cut funding to the Environment Agency, Liz. Was that a mistake?
Well, I am a great believer in value for money from public services. And believe me, there are plenty of things the Environment Agency were doing that they shouldn't have been doing. And I was very clear that, and I'm sure there are a few people in the room that have experienced the activity of the Environment Agency. It's the responsibility of Ofwat, the water regulator, to put pressure on them.
Lady in the front row, your question, please.
Good evening, Liz. I'm Penny Ann O'Donnell. I'm the voluntary director for the CPF. How will you, thank you. How will you ensure that your policy team regularly engages with the CPF and our 10,000 members with our great grassroots upwards policy ideas? And also, given your drive for an aspiration nation, as a speech and language therapist, I'd like to ask, how will you ensure that education really is a ladder to opportunity for our children with SEND and reduce the adversarial tribunal culture around accessing the EHCP support that these children need?
So first of all, I joined the Conservative Party in 1996. I've been a Conservative activist for many years. I've been a councillor, and Conservative members have huge value to add, and we need to be using them more in government. I would appoint a strong single-party chairman who would show leadership on these issues, as well as making sure we are getting the policy feed-in from the Conservative Policy Forum and also the feedback. Because one of the mistakes I think we've made as a government is not listening enough to people on the ground. And I know, there's a huge amount of experience and common sense right across the Conservative Party. And I'm somebody who does engage with people and does talk to people, and I would absolutely commit to do that. On the issue of special educational needs, the system at the moment is pretty difficult for parents. And I speak to parents who say they feel like they're constantly battling the system. And actually, if you are looking after a child with special educational needs, you deserve help. You don't deserve to have to battle the system. So we do need to reform the system to make it much more responsive to people. I think family hubs are part of the solution to that. I think having more support in schools is part of the solution to that. But I agree with you. At the moment, we have created, I'm afraid, a nightmare for lots of parents who have to just battle the system.
Another brief question on the services, public services, before we take more questions. Given your plan on national insurance, what will you do about the crisis? I don't think it's too much of a stretch to use that word about social care in this country. How would you solve the problems facing social care, which are truly immense?
So I still would spend the money. I would just take it out of general taxation rather than raising national insurance. But I would spend that money in social care. The fact is, quite a lot of it has gone into the NHS. I believe it should go to local authorities to deal with the very real issues in social care, because the problem we've got at the moment is people are in beds in the NHS who would be better off in social care beds. So put the money into social care, free up more space in the National Health Service, and empower the front line in the National Health Service, because there are still too many central diktats going to the front line. People on the front line feel disempowered. We're seeing increasing numbers of people leaving the profession. So those are the issues we need to deal with.
These services are starved of funds now. Hard to dispute that. You are proposing to cut taxes.
We put these extra money in. We put the extra 13 billion in. And what people who work in the NHS tell me is the problem is the number of layers in the organisation they have to go through to get things done, the lack of local decision making. That's what people are telling me. That's what people are telling me is the problem, rather than a lack of funding.
Gentleman in the front row, sir.
Good evening, Liz. Young people, you spoke about youth violence, gang crime, and we're working at 38 primary schools in the region right now, kids who are at risk of getting involved in youth violence. What do you perceive to be the fundamental issues at the root cause of those problems, and what would your government do to bring some transformation to those issues and change the lives of these young people?
Well, the work you do is very important, and I think youth clubs, for example, like Youth Zone, are very important in giving young people alternative places to be rather than being prey to gangs. I visited one very recently in London, so I'd like to see more of those. Some of those are funded by the private sector, others funded by the voluntary sector. I support schools opening for longer hours, actually, again to help children get the skills they need, but also to make sure that they are less prey to potential alternatives. And I think it is all about early intervention. That is what it's about. It's about making sure the alternative is better for those young people and they have those opportunities. And that's why these things which sometimes sound esoteric, like talking about economic growth, what it is about more apprenticeships, more jobs, more good opportunities for young people, so they are not encouraged to go off in the wrong direction.
Okay, I'm trying to get through as many as we can. Lady, second row back.
Like you, I'm a councillor, you were a councillor, I am a councillor in Dudley. Has anybody got a mic? I was going to say I'm used to shouting anyway, so I'm a councillor in Dudley. I'm actually the lead member for Children's Services there. So following on from my, these weren't planted questions, by the way, we know that working white class boys are actually our most disadvantaged group. Both you and Rishi have mentioned education, aspirations. Will you, as a Conservative, bring back grammar schools? Because that is the most fundamental thing.
So the answer is, yes, I will allow new grammar schools, absolutely. And I will also allow new free schools as well. And I'm a big fan of free schools like the Michaela School, which is fantastic. And we need to allow the good schools to expand and set up more branches right around the country. And I'm somebody who did go to a comprehensive school. My daughters now both go to grammar school. I want children all across the country to have those opportunities. But we also need to deal with primary school education, because the fact is 30% of kids are leaving primary school without basic English and maths. And it's very hard if you get to age 11 without that to be able to succeed in life. It just makes it a whole lot harder. I'm proud of what I did in education. I removed calculators from the primary school tests so that all kids had to get the basics of mental arithmetic. But we need to do more. We need more specialist teaching, particularly on maths in primary school. We need more early years support too, because the earlier we start, the better.
Okay, I'm being told time is pretty much. I want to ask you just before we go a question which is as much about you, Liz Truss, as it is about any question of policy. So, your character. By the way, when it comes to you, your personality, I did enjoy your interview with the Mail on Sunday newspaper quite recently when you told the interviewer that whenever you see a mouse, there are lots of mice at the House of Commons, you jump on a chair. Was that true? Or did you?
That wasn't. I'm not sure if that interview was recently, but I'm worried that somebody will get a mouse out now. I'm not a massive fan of mice, I have to say.
I'm sure.
And there are a load in the House of Commons that I think we should have more cats.
More
cats. More cats is the answer.
Rishi,
and I'm very pleased there is a cat at number 10. So if I do become Prime Minister, at least I'll be mice-free.
All right. Rishi Sunak is, I think, too much of a man to carry mice around for the purpose of frightening a rival. Now, look, here's another question. One of the first things, and very briefly if I could, one of the first things that will happen when and if you become Prime Minister, you'll be ushered into a room, very privately at number 10, will be laid out in front of you what are called the letters of last resort, your orders to our Trident boat captain on whether you, Prime Minister Liz Truss, is giving the order to unleash our nuclear weapons. It would mean global annihilation. I won't ask you, would you press the button? You will say yes. But faced sick, how does that thought make you feel?
I think it's an important duty of the Prime Minister. I'm ready to do that.
I asked how it would make you feel.
I'm ready to do it.
Okay, that's your answer. Liz Truss, thank you for those answers. Ladies and gentlemen, Liz Truss. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Okay, we don't have a clapometer. That was reasonably encouraging for Liz Truss. I think our next speaker, he'll probably be finding a lot of popularity in this room as well. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rishi Sunak. Good to see you.
Nice
Good to see you.
Right,
let's have a chat. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just going to go now. We're all good.
Anyway, it's good to see you, Rishi. Thank you for good to talk to you. Let me ask you a question first. The same question I put to Liz Truss. You know the numbers. 18% forecast of inflation. The energy price cap is going up and up, far more than you imagined when you set out that plan to help the worse off. Which means to help the worse off in future, you're going to have to be much more open-handed with the British taxpayers' money. Will you do that? Can you guarantee now that if you are the Prime Minister, you will match whatever the need happens to be as we head towards energy caps of 3,500, maybe 5,000, 6,000 in April? Whatever it takes, you will provide the cash?
Yes, I've already said that, John. And that's because the right thing in these circumstances is, as I said, for a compassionate Conservative government to meet the needs of the most vulnerable in our society, and that's what I would do as Prime Minister. Now, how are we going to do that? As I said, I want to cut VAT off energy bills, because that will provide some support to everybody, on top of what I announced as Chancellor. But there are two groups of people for whom I think we will need to go further. That's for those on the lowest incomes and pensioners. Now, my view is that the right way to help those people is to provide them with direct financial assistance over the autumn and winter. And Liz's view, as you probably discussed, and I hope you did, is very different, right? And this is a good point of debate in this contest, why these hustings are a good forum, because Liz's view is that we've ruled out providing direct support and thinks that tax cuts are the answer. Now, a tax cut that she's proposing for someone on her salary is worth about £1,700, right? That's pretty hefty. For someone working very hard on the national living wage, that tax cut is worth barely £1 a week. For a pensioner who's not working, and there are millions of those who are very anxious about the winter, that tax cut is worth precisely zero. Now, I think if we carried on with that plan, if I don't win this and that's the plan that we carry on with as a party, millions of people are going to face the risk of destitution this winter. Literally millions. And if we don't do anything to avert that, I think it will be a moral failure of the Conservative government, and I don't think the British people would ever forgive us. And if I'm Prime Minister, I will not let that happen.
Rishi, you, within very recent memory, you opposed cutting VAT on energy bills, and then you changed your mind on that. Why did you do that U-turn? Was it that you were more desperate to win the support?
As you said in your opening, John, the situation has deteriorated since I was Chancellor and announced support. And I'm perfectly open and blunt about it. Cutting VAT is not the most perfect way to do things. It definitely has drawbacks. But you have to deal with the world as it is. If I become Prime Minister in a couple of weeks' time and bills go up in just a few weeks after that, there aren't that many levers that you can pull that deliver support to almost everybody in the country, which is what you would need to do, that will actually work. Now, I've been there. I've done the job, right? I've sat there and figured out how do you do this. It is one of the few levers that a Prime Minister has available to them that I know will 100% certainty get cash to people quickly. Is it perfect? No. But I'm not going to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I'm going to deal with the practical reality of the situation. So I don't make any apology for going further than I said before. I want to make sure we help people, and that is a realistic, practical way to do it. And I think it's one that will make a difference to people in a few weeks' time.
It is as you say, one of the defining arguments of this leadership contest. You are against unfunded tax cuts in principle, not just as a matter of economic theory, which is, of course, I guess, why you said yesterday, as clearly, I guess, as you could, that you could not serve in a Liz Truss cabinet.
No, I mean, what I was saying is I'm not focused on those things at the moment, John. What I am focused on doing...
You said you'd had a period of being at odds with your leader. You weren't going to do that again.
I was reflecting on the last couple of years and actually having been in Cabinet. I'm one of these people who... Maybe it's old-fashioned, actually, and in the last few weeks I've discovered quite how old-fashioned it is. My general view is if you're in a Cabinet, while you're in it, you defend all the decisions in it. That's what collective responsibility means. And I take that seriously. I know it seems a bit quaint these days. So, and I reflect on, and that's important. But look, you're right. I don't believe in unfunded tax cuts. And, there's been a lot of talk in this leadership election about Margaret Thatcher and, and rightly so, because she's our greatest post-war Prime Minister. But I reflect on it and I think, well, what actually was Margaret Thatcher's most important legacy? Why is it that she's so revered? Now, you could say, well, it's because she took on the unions, because of her economic reforms, because she spread home ownership far and wide. Now, all those things were important, but I don't actually think that's why she's revered. I think it's because of her character. And she was prepared always to take difficult decisions. She was prepared to say the things that might be difficult that the country needed to hear. She wasn't prepared ever to make a promise that she couldn't keep. That's what I think Margaret Thatcher was about, and that's a standard that I hold myself to. And I think unfunded tax cuts are wrong. And you know what? Her Chancellor, Nigel Lawson, agrees with me. The head of her policy unit agrees with me. Norman Lamont agrees with me. All these people who understood Margaret Thatcher's economics are supporting my economic plan because it's the right one for our country, and it's a conservative approach to managing the economy, and that's what our party stands for. Okay.
So it's a question of principle, Rishi, which you say you will stand by. You put that above any question of serving in a cabinet, a red box, a ministerial card, all of the rest of it. Now, when the time comes, there would have to be votes in the House of Commons on that. There'd have to be a finance bill, and those votes are whipped. 3-line whips. Dissent is not tolerated. You wouldn't serve in a cabinet and defend those policies. Would you vote for them?
I think, John, you're getting to all these hypotheticals about may or may what
happened. It's not a great stretch, Rishi,
well, because
from that to that.
I think what I'm focused on doing, and actually why we're all here tonight, is to figure out whose plan is the right one to take the country forward. People that are here, as I'm doing every day, 5 or 6 times a day, talking to our members across the country, because you're acting like this is already over, and it's not. I'm going to fight hard for every vote, and I'm going to keep talking about my plan.
No, I don't suggest that it's over, but these are, I suggest, questions of character too. Let me put a question to you, which is on the minds of very many people today: crime, in the light of the awful news story that I mentioned earlier on, the 8-year-old child in Liverpool gunned down by gunmen who forced their way into the family flat. Your thoughts on that, and in the context of the need, the demand for more police officers than are being proposed now. The numbers we've seen so far, as you know, make up the cuts from the austerity years. What would you do in office?
Yeah, I mean, I only read about it earlier this evening, and it's shocking. Olivia, I think her name was. I actually thought she was 9, which is the same age as my younger daughter, and it's horrific. I mean, I'm sure the parents, grandparents here, and I read it, and I was, you know, I called my wife and spoke to my daughter. Actually, is what I did when I found out about it earlier on today. And my heart goes out to her family, as I'm sure it does from everybody here tonight, about grappling with a loss like that. What can we do, in government to try and prevent things like that from happening? Yes, it's about putting more police officers on the street, and we've got a plan to do that. But it's also making sure
more than are proposed so far.
Well, I mean, at the moment, we need to finish putting 20,000 more on the streets. But I think actually we need to make sure that they're focused on the right things, and that we're using their time effectively, and we're using the best techniques that are available to policing. And I mentioned it in my remarks earlier. I think actually when I talk to people involved in fighting crime, when I talk to our police and crime commissioners and our councillors everywhere, what's clear is that there are things that hold us back from getting with crime in our country, and the policing tool. Now, our Conservative police and crime commissioners understand that, and they want to use it. We just came from a Hustings in Manchester, where Andy Burnham, the Labour mayor, has got a police force that's been in special measures, and I want to actually provide police forces like that with the powers to use stop and search. Similarly, I mentioned grooming gangs, and I think it's another thing that has affected young children as young as Olivia and my daughters for too long. It's very pervasive in our country, and if I'm fortunate to win this, I want to do something to tackle that pernicious crime. And as I said earlier, I will never let political correctness stand in the way of keeping our country safe. That's the kind of Prime Minister I'll be.
Okay, let's look at another practical, as it were, proposal from you to deal with or to help another hard-pressed public service, the health service. It is one of your big ideas, isn't it, to charge patients penalties when they fail to attend for their medical appointments. So let me put it to you, for the sake of the discussion. That's a gimmick. Who will enforce these penalties? Are you proposing county court actions in pursuit of £10, £12 penalties? Are you asking GPs to deny treatment to people who can't or won't pay this penalty? How does it make sense?
So John, what you describe as a gimmick, I completely and utterly disagree with, right? Now, we all, as Conservatives, know that we don't measure our success by how much money we throw at things. And if we want to be able to credibly cut taxes, and I do, I want to cut all your taxes, but there is no one who can sit here and credibly tell you that they're going to cut your taxes responsibly unless they've also got a plan to reform the NHS to make it more efficient. Because if we don't, it will continue to gobble up every single pound that everyone has, right? And it's not enough just to say that and say, oh gosh, yes, I was too many bureaucrats in the NHS, everyone will clap, great. Like, we need some practical solutions, right? So yes, this is one, because you know why? 15 million appointments last year missed. Not just at GPs, but let's talk about why this is a prize, first of all, to go after. Not just at GPs, but hospital doctors too. 15 million, right? That's not right. Doesn't value our doctors, deprives people of the care they need. And if we can get this right, it's not about making money from charging, it's about changing the culture in this country so it's not acceptable, right? Now, if we get it right, if people cancel those appointments in advance, then we free up tons of extra healthcare, and we will get the backlogs down quicker. But you know what, John? Right, so you know what? I was a person who set up furlough in a matter of weeks, right? When everyone said to me, well, how will you do this? How will this work? We don't even know what the word means, let alone how we're going to administer a system that is going to actually make sure that we pay the wages of 10 million people. And every single newspaper, as they told me afterwards, had kept space that day to write the story that the system would never work. And it did, because that's what I do, John. But when they come across difficult problems, I get to grips with them and I solve them. That's what I will do as Prime Minister.
Okay. That answer clearly went down well with a large section of the audience. I'm not yet convinced it would go down quite as well with GPs, but we leave that to the verdict.
I've been out across the country and I've had enormous support for it. Why do you think, I bet lots of you here, when you go to your GP surgery, don't they, lots of them have signs up now, don't they? They all have signs up and they tell you how many people missed an appointment last week, last month, because they don't want people to miss appointments because it's not valuing their time.
All right. Just a question then from one of our listeners. His name's William Armstrong, and he's asking why there isn't more focus on standards of conduct. In a word, would your government be more honest than the one we have?
Yes. That's why I left the government, John, because it wasn't.
Would you then, therefore, appoint, as the Committee on Standards in Public Life urges, would you to initiate investigations whether you want them or not?
Yeah, I've said already very clearly that I would reappoint the independent advisor on ethics, and I would make sure that they have the powers and responsibilities to hold people to account. But look, obviously it gets set by the leader, and I would set an example. But I talked earlier about appealing to swing voters, because I think this is really important. Now, if we're going to win that election, right, if we're going to appeal to all these swing voters that we need to, remember, they're not Tories, right, every day. They're not Labour people. They're swing voters. So they're not ideological. What do they want? They want a government that works properly, right? That's what those people want. And my view is we need to appeal to them. So I'm going to run a government where things are conducted seriously, where they're conducted competently, with decency and integrity at the heart of everything that we do. That is the change that I'm going to bring. That's the Prime Minister that I'm going to be, and that's how we're going to restore standards and win the next election.
I'm going to open questions to the floor, but a last question from one of our listeners, whose name is Clarissa. Would you seek to change the system of electing leaders of the Conservative Party, or would you leave them as they are? I don't know how your answer might go down with this audience. Let's find out.
I'm just looking nervously at the chairman and all our great volunteers. Look, I think we've said anyway. Actually, I think after all these processes, it's worth people sitting down and figuring out what worked, what didn't work. Talk to all of you about how it worked for you. I think that's a totally reasonable thing to do. But I think actually I'd go further than that, because we talk a lot in all these things about what I want to do for the country, but I also care about all of you. And if you've got 5 minutes tonight, if you're interested, online somewhere, there is my contract with members, because I think all of you are amazing, right? I'm only here because of the support of my association, my activists, my volunteers, my councillors, and we owe all of you an extraordinary debt. So in my contract for members, I've set out a few things that I want to do to support all of you. I'll give you 2 things just to throw it out there. One of them, I was talking to Andrew about this, I want to regularly make sure we have surveys of what you think. I shouldn't have to go to Con Home and see what you think. I want to know what you think directly. And more than that, what I want to say is, what I will commit to you is we're going to have these regular surveys, and then those top issues are they going to get actually discussed at our political cabinets, so that you can join this party one week, you can feed in your ideas the next week, and know that it's going to be discussed by the people at the top the week after that, because that's how a party like ours should work. And the other thing I want to do, because we talked about winning that election, is I want to raise more money for this party than we've raised before, specifically to put fully paid campaign managers in all our target seats, because that's the support that we need to win the next election.
Let's take some questions.
Let's do it.
Let's start with you, sir. 3 rows back.
Good evening, John. Good evening, Rishi.
Good evening.
When we have a crisis of any sort in this country, whether it's for us, for anybody else, we normally appoint a task force. We have a serious crisis going on with the energy supplies and everything else. Would you appoint a task force to immediately, if you become the Prime Minister, and actually see what they come up with and put it into action?
Yes, and you're right. I mean, this task force approach has served us well, notably with the vaccine, actually. And the Prime Minister deserves enormous credit for assembling that task force, empowering them, and people like Kate Bingham. They did an extraordinary job, and I think all of us here feel very proud of that, and we should applaud them. So, look, what does that mean for energy? Well, it means a few things that we need to get right. I'll give you a few things. Not only, of course, we need to provide short-term support for people, look, but that's only short-term. We need to make sure we don't have to deal with this problem again. So we need better energy security here at home, reduce our energy dependence. So I want to absolutely turbocharge our programme of energy efficiency. Because at the moment there are millions of homes that could benefit from loft insulation, cavity wall insulation, smart controls. We've got a government set up money to do that, but it's not working properly. And if we can do that, we can save people £400 off their bills and reduce our energy need. We also need to create an innovation economy that's going to, not a million miles away from here, create the small modular reactors that can power all our homes much more cheaply and cleanly. We need to find new forms of energy storage to make sure that next year we don't have to deal with this problem. And lastly, we have to reform our energy market. Now, what I've been very clear about is that we're all paying far too much for our electricity at the moment for reasons that we haven't addressed, because the electricity providers get to charge us a very high price based on what's going on in the natural gas markets. That's wrong. I would change it. They've done it in lots of European countries. We're behind, and as Prime Minister, I'd fix it so that you and all the businesses can get cheaper electricity as soon as possible, because that's what our country needs.
The lady over here, 3 rows from the just a little further back, the lady there with the spotted dress. Madam.
So a subject that hasn't come up so far, HS2. It's having a devastating effect in Staffordshire. And Andrew Stevenson's actually been to our farm. I know farmers that have no income whatsoever. They've had land compulsory purchase, and yet they're not getting paid. They're getting no money. We've been waiting years for money to build a new house. We're getting nothing. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about the effect on Staffordshire and everywhere else and the billions it's costing this country?
Well, I'm sorry to hear about your situation, and I'd be happy to talk to you after to make sure we get your situation resolved as quickly as possible. Look, on HS2, in fact, that was a more negative reception about HS2 than I expected, given where we are tonight. But look, in general, I'm not going to be able to tell you right now I can cancel that project. I'm not going to do that. So we are where we are at the moment. Now, what I can tell you, though, is, and this actually goes to your question, is the company, and Andrew will know this well, the company HS2 Limited that is in charge of this needs to be held to very firm account. And that is something that I will do. And it's not just, it's about making sure that people like you are treated fairly, but it's also, in general, making sure that disruption on communities is absolutely minimised. And whether it's actually, you know, down in the south, in Buckinghamshire, where I was earlier last week, or up here in Staffordshire, we need to make sure that as it's being built in a way that brings people along with them. And I can tell it's not happening, and I will fix that as Prime Minister, because that's not right, it's not fair, and we need to make sure that we correct it.
Okay. I'm going to ask the young lady here on this side.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sunak. Thank you for joining us here today. So given the current cost of living crisis and Russia's part to play in that, I was wondering, how are you going to tackle our reliance on China?
That's great. That's a great question. So, look, China represents, I believe, and the Chinese Communist Party represent the biggest threat to our economic security and thereby our national security out of any state in the country, right? So that's a straightforward fact that I believe. That's also what the head of MI5 and the FBI recently said in a joint speech that they gave. So what does that mean for us? Well, it means we need to do a few things. We need to be robust in standing up for our values and our interests. So it means supporting the people in Hong Kong, as we so brilliantly did recently. It means a defence partnership with Australia and America and putting our about our allies over there. And it means what I did as Chancellor with passing a new law that allows us to block investment from hostile foreign actors that are trying to infiltrate our companies and steal our technology. And as Prime Minister, I would use those powers that I passed as Chancellor to make sure that we protect ourselves. And the last thing I'd say is we've got to be thinking about the future threats. Right now, we are here in one of the most amazing automotive manufacturing parts of our country, and over time we're going to transition to electric vehicles. That will be great for net zero, create lots of jobs, and save us money. But no good us doing that if it turns out that all the rare earth minerals going into those batteries all come from China. So that's what I started doing as Chancellor, was working with our allies like Australia, Canada and America to build up a supply chain. So exactly as you said, means that we are not reliant on China in years to come for things that are really important to this country. That's the type of thinking that I think your Prime Minister needs to have, and that's the type of approach to China that I will take.
No, Rishi, no questioning the strength of the British response in support of Ukraine. If it came to the point of a threat, a physical threat, a military threat on the part of China towards Taiwan, what should Britain's response be to that?
I wouldn't change our current policy on that position at all. So I think our policy vis-à-vis Taiwan is the right one as it speaks today.
In concrete terms, what would you do? Sanctions, military support?
The best thing we can do to prevent aggression against Taiwan from China is showing Russia that they will not be successful in Ukraine. That is the absolute best thing we can do, and that's why we must have resolve there.
Lady here.
I'm named Jackie Gardner, and we do an awful lot of campaigning in Coventry trying to get a Conservative gain. So we do a lot of knocking on doors, and a lot of people keep telling us, when are we going to sort out all the immigration, the illegal immigration coming in? So what would you do?
Yes, great question. So, and I mentioned it earlier. Look, as I said, we should never lose sight of the fact that our country has this unbelievable capacity for compassion in welcoming people from around the world. My family are a beneficiary of that. Many others here tonight will have also been. And we've demonstrated it in Hong Kong, in Ukraine, in Afghanistan and in Syria. But when people are coming here illegally, it undermines trust in the system. We've got to grip it. So we have to be radical about it. We have to be bold. If you've got 5 minutes tonight, alongside my contract for members thing, there's a 10-point plan on this that I've put out, because I think it is genuinely one of the big emergencies facing our countries. And you can read about it here. I will give you 1 or 2 specific bits of the 10-point plan to give you an illustration that I want to be different about this. The first is, I want to move away from the European definition of asylum, because it is too broad and it allows far too many people to exploit it. So that's the first thing. Second thing, I think second out of the 10, is we've got to get tougher with our foreign policy. So right now, we have this situation which is extraordinary, that we will go to a country, we'll talk to them about a trade deal we want to do, we'll also give them foreign aid, right, to help their country. But at the same time, we are not asking them, or requesting them, or demanding that they also take back their failed asylum seekers, right? That's wrong, and we've got to change that as well.
On that, you have taken a pretty strong line on this matter. You said that countries that refuse to take back deportees from this country could pay a price in terms of aid payments. This country has, as you know, a proud record of supporting countries and peoples in need, especially and including humanitarian aid for emergencies around the world. Are you saying that aid would be in question in the course of a dispute of this kind?
But as I said specifically, there's a difference between humanitarian emergencies, which of course we're always going to be responsive to, but then situations where we have ongoing aid programs in countries which we've had for years, and at the same time, that country is not taking back its failed asylum seekers. Look, I think that is a practical, common sense approach to this problem, and it's one that the vast majority of the British people will absolutely support, and we should not be shy about pursuing a policy like that. That's cool.
And you're not seeking here to have it both ways. You're not saying it's possible to deprive a country of aid with no human cost.
There is always going to be more need for our aid budget than we can provide, right? That's just a fact. Sad fact, but that's the reality of it. So when we're choosing where to provide aid, who to provide it to, I think it is, and this is not my money, it's all your money, it's the country's money. I think it's entirely reasonable that if we're thinking about where we can do that, we do it with countries that are happy to help us and take back their failed asylum seekers. That seems entirely logical and common sense to me, and I genuinely believe the vast majority of the British public will be quite surprised to find out that we don't do that already, quite frankly.
Gentleman
here. So, as everyone in this room should know, we're the Conservative and Unionist Party. So what will you do if you're our next Prime Minister to follow on from the amazing work that Liz Truss has done around the security, like sorting the Northern Ireland Protocol out and making sure that Northern Ireland stays a part of the Union?
Yes, so I would actually just carry on with the policy that we've got in place. So we have a bill in Parliament that you all know about. I would carry that on, and you're right in the sense that Northern Ireland's economy is being dragged out of the orbit of the UK, and that's wrong. And as Prime Minister, I want to fix that, and the bill gives us the ability to do that if we can't get a negotiated settlement. Now, the other part of the union we need to worry about is obviously Scotland, which you didn't mention, but I think we might as well talk about it for a second, because it's really important. And there I think we need to do a few things. I think the first thing is we've got to more actively demonstrate the benefit of the union in Scotland. And that's something that I started doing as Chancellor. Actually, not, you know, the civil service got all very upset, but I said, hang on, we're going to actually now start investing directly in Scottish communities. We're going to talk to them directly and not have everything just go to the SNP government, because we believe in genuine devolution. That's really working, and we need to do more of that. The second thing we need to do is remember that when it comes to the union in Scotland, who are we talking to? We're not talking to Tories. They're all fine. We need to talk to the third of the people in Scotland who do not vote Conservative and are never likely to, but are unionists, right? And you need a leader who you think can actually talk to those people, right? And I believe that I can. And the last thing, and this is probably the most important, when it comes to arguing for the union, it's easy to think about, well, make the argument about borrowing. How will Scotland manage? What about their currency? Who's going to pay their pensions? What about trade? Now, those are all important arguments. But we have to remember, nationalism is very seductive. It's a romantic idea. And we have to fight that idea with an argument that speaks to people's hearts. And my grandparents emigrated here, not to England. They emigrated to the United Kingdom. And it wasn't geography for them. It represented a set of values. And we have to make an argument about the union that is based on those shared values, that speaks to people's hearts. And that's what I will do as Prime Minister.
Rishi, the gentleman started his question by asking about the Northern Ireland Protocol bill. I won't ask you, will you pursue that bill? You'll say yes. I won't ask you, yes. Indeed you have. I won't ask you, will you push it through Parliament using the Parliament Act? I've no doubt that you would. Would a trade war with the European Union, because at the moment, the European Union, London are at loggerheads, would a trade war at a time of recession be a price worth paying for making your point to Brussels?
So, when you said rightly, John, that the relationship is at loggerheads, and I think, actually, you have to think about this. With a new Prime Minister, we have a chance to reset that relationship, because it's clear that it's not in the best of places, both with France, the EU, with Ireland. Now, I believe that as a new Prime Minister, I will have an opportunity to reset that relationship. I have very good relations with all my counterparts in those places and have actually managed to get agreements with them, whether it's on sanctions policy against Russia or indeed on global tax policy, that shows that I can constructively find solutions to things. So I would like to bring that to the table, because if we can do that and reach a negotiated solution, it will be far quicker in resolving the problems in Northern Ireland than waiting for the Parliament Act, which, if necessary, of course, I will do, but will take time. So I would like to also try and pursue a negotiated settlement, and I think as a new Prime Minister, there's an opening to try and do so.
Of course you want, of course you want a negotiated settlement. Any other answer would surely be irresponsible. But there is a danger of a final trade economic conflict. Would that be a price worth paying?
I mean, John, I know we're running out of time, and I don't know if take one more question or your questions, but look, what are we talking about here? What we're talking about here is, look, if you're a grandparent at the moment, you can't send a present to your granddaughter in Northern Ireland from GB without filling out a lot of forms. If you want to go camping and you can't take your dog on holiday, right? Or if you're a British supermarket and it's like, hang on, I can't sell my sandwiches in every part of the United Kingdom. Those are the kind of practical things we're talking about. No one needs to have a trade war to resolve practical things like that. That's completely ridiculous, and we can find a solution that doesn't involve that.
Okay. Let's go over here to this side. 4 rows back. Gentleman with his arm in the air with a T-shirt. Can we get a lady here waiting first? Let's do that first.
Right, great.
Hi, good afternoon.
It's the last one, is it? Right, yeah.
Hi. Hi. So we've talked a lot over the last month or so about employment, and there are lots of professional sectors in the UK that we struggle to find enough staff for. Social workers, speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, all professions that are highly skilled and have a real impact on the health and safety of our children and young people. What are you going to do to improve recruitment in those sectors?
Yeah, well, good question to end on. And so look, many of you here will have businesses. And I'm sure if I ask you what's the #1 challenge you have, other than energy bills, I'm sure lots of you would say it's getting workers, right? And that is, we all know, I see lots of nodding, right? The thing that's holding our economy back and is causing inflation at the moment is a lack of people in the workforce. So I think we need to do a couple of things, and your question and more broadly, right? The first thing I want to do is actually tackle our welfare system and tighten it up, because right now, I'll tell you this, there are more people claiming unemployment benefit than there are job vacancies in the economy. Right? Think about that. That is wrong, and it's certainly wrong under a Conservative government. So I want to make sure that we tighten up our welfare system, support people off benefits and into work, because that's good for them, good for their families, good for the taxpayer, but also good for the economy and will ease inflationary pressures. And it's exactly what a Conservative government should be doing. Right? Second thing is obviously training and skills. And you mentioned social care. Like, one of the things that I was proud to do, even though it was difficult, was create a new way to fund the NHS and social care. And part of that money is going to go to the social care workforce, because they don't feel appreciated or valued enough, and that's why lots of them leave and we have high turnover. With the money, we're going to create career pathways, new certification, training, qualifications, which will give a real sense of career progression, and I know will mean that people stay in the industry, are more fulfilled, will get better care, and will help with all the recruitment issues. And then the last thing we need to do is be pragmatic on migration. Right? Now, I proudly voted for Brexit. Right? And Brexit for me was about control of our borders. It wasn't saying that no one should ever come here. Right? So if we are tackling illegal migration, and the lady's question, we're doing that. If we are being tough on the welfare system and getting people off that and into work, then I'm entirely pragmatic about using migration where we need to support our public services or the economy. And I think many of us who voted for Brexit will be comfortable with that as long as we're doing those other things, and that's the approach that I will take to that problem.
Well then, I think that is time.
No tax questions at all. We should do one, the corporation tax. Go on.
Corporation. Okay, Rishi is aching to be asked a question.
There's not been a single question about tax. And I am shocked. I'm literally shocked. This can't be the only hustings where we have not talked about tax.
No, I think I asked you a question about tax at the very top. I asked you about VAT, which was one of the tax policies, one of your signature.
That's not, yes.
No, I accept your apology, Rishi. It's perfectly fine. Corporation tax. I like to leave people happy. We'll talk about corporation tax. Give me your thoughts on your line on corporation tax. Well, look, we're talking about big companies, aren't we, rather than small?
Right. So, look, many of you would have heard that I want to put up corporation tax, and I'm sure when Liz was here and she said she would scrap that, and you all probably clapped, and that's fine. But let me explain why those of you that are clapping are, in my view, wrong. Right? So let me explain what is happening. So, yes, corporation tax is going to go up next year. But why is it going up? Well, it's going up in part because of what I said. Because, like Margaret Thatcher and Nigel Lawson, I believe it's not right to have excessive borrowing. Right? I don't think it's right to spend money on public services and not pay for it and ask our kids and our grandkids to pick up the tab. Right? I don't think that's a moral thing to do. It's certainly not a responsible thing to do. Right? So, but three things you need to know. Three things about this that you need to know. Right? Number one, we will still, after this increase, have the lowest corporation tax rate in the G7, so the large economies that we compete against. America, Canada, Germany, France, Italy, Japan will have the lowest. Broaden it out to the 20 largest economies in the world that we compete against. We're going to have the fourth lowest rate. So point number one, this is an internationally very low rate. No one can say otherwise, right? Point number two, this only applies to the largest businesses. 70% of UK registered companies won't pay the increased rate. They're exempt. They're going to pay a small profits rate because I want to support small businesses. My mum ran a small business. I know what it's like, and we are the party of small businesses. So that's point number two, right? Point number three. Now, point number three, and this is the most important point, right? This is the most important point. I'm going to combine that increase with significant tax reforms and tax cuts to the other bits of our corporate tax system. So for those businesses that are investing, so imagine that manufacturing plant that's expanding, putting in an extra line, putting in some new robotics to increase the productivity of its output. That we have a big tax cut for. Imagine another business, not a million miles away from here, that's investing in R&D to create a new small modular reactor that's going to provide clean energy for us at affordable prices or anything else. That business also is going to get a tax cut on R&D. Why? Because those are the areas where we fall behind all our other countries. When you say, why is our productivity lower? Why is our growth not as high? It's because our businesses are not investing as much. They're not innovating as much. I've studied this problem, I've talked to 1 million people, I've got a career in business, and I know what will work. And if we deliver these tax cuts, because I'm a conservative like you, I want to cut taxes, and I think tax cuts can drive growth, but only if we cut the right ones. And with my plan, we will actually get the outcome we want. If we go with Liz's plan and stick with what we've done for the last 10 years, nothing's going to change. Investment in this country today, no higher than it was a decade ago. We've got to try something different. My plan is a better plan, and I am 100% convinced that if you give me this job and we deliver this tax plan, we will have a faster growing, higher productivity economy that is creating jobs everywhere, but especially here in the Midlands. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Perfect.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Take care, Richard. So the signature policy, tax between the two sides, the two candidates in this race to be our next Prime Minister. We made some progress, I think, in learning a few things that perhaps we haven't learned until this moment. We shall see. There are 2 weeks still to go. It is still not over. A lot of people still to vote, even though a lot of you seem to have done so. For now, this evening, let's hope you found that, and listeners at 2 Times Radio at home found that a useful exercise as well. Thanks to our candidates, thanks to you, and from me, a very good night.